And now I'm going to just close with a few tips for meetings. We could talk a lot more about meetings, and maybe we will another day. But what I want you to think about with meetings is, first of all, meetings are a place to also focus on tasks. What are the tasks that adults are doing? And what are the interactions of the learners, facilitators, and content in a meeting? We can really apply this frame to adult meetings too, because adult meetings are usually where learning for adults is happening or not happening in a school. And it's important because usually when we want to move that chocolate cake to the right for students, we somehow need to improve that knowledge and skill of the teachers, which often either happens or doesn't in a meeting. So it's a powerful place to focus your attention, these meetings that people are having and that you're having. And lately, many of us have been in an online environment here in the United States. We still are, although we're starting to ease out of it. We're having a harder time than you all are having with the pandemic. And all of my meetings are still on Zoom, basically. I know you all have moved back to in-person work, and I suspect that over the next year plus, we'll all be moving in and out of face to face and online meetings in ways that are new to many of us. So, I wanted to just reflect back a few tips for meetings. My first tips apply whether you're face to face or you're online. The very number one thing is just to have a high bar for whether we need a meeting anyway. I think once we're back in person, it's like, yay, we can see each other. We should go back to all of our routines. But one thing this disruption of the pandemic offers is a chance for us to rethink some of how we've been approaching things. And is that the best way? And obviously, we're going to have to do meetings a little bit differently, even as we keep everybody's health in mind. So, do we really need a meeting? Or is this something that could just be, if it's information, let's just pass it along via email or some other venue, right? So, that's the first thing. Do we need to meet in the first place? The second thing is, well, if we're going to meet, we need to use time really wisely. And time is so precious now when we're all together. So, first tip, just have an agenda. Second, try to keep those meetings as short as you can. I think sometimes we just have containers of amount of time for a weekly meeting, and so we fill that container. Online in particular, I mean, you all know when you were having a lot of meetings on the computer, it's hard to sit and be on long Zoom meetings, right? So online, I've been really trying to keep my meetings to 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and even 45 instead of 60 makes a difference, right? And definitely not more than 90. And if you're gonna go more than 90, you've got to move. I think online you have to kind of move after an hour, but in person, my rule of thumb is never go more than 90 minutes without giving people a break, including adults need to move. And then, of course, we just had this talk about tasks. Of course, part of using your time wisely is to have meaningful tasks. Like people know, like this is good. I'm here because we're doing something meaningful. My third overall tip is to check in as human beings. I think that's so important now with all of the anxiety that's been part of this global pandemic. And at any given moment different things will be going on for people. That's true in the regular stream of life too. And so I think it's always nice in a meeting to have some kind of informal check-in. It doesn't have to be long at the beginning, just to check in as human beings. And then online, if you're the host, you can kind of simulate that informal hang around time with just like hanging out on Zoom for 5 minutes. Or if you're in person, I like to try, especially if I'm the one facilitating the meeting, to not schedule things back to back so that that informal mingle time, all those questions people want, or just that human interaction can happen. Fourth tip is just have some kind of system for documenting meetings that happen over and over again. I like to use this thing called the rolling agenda, which I just put in Google Docs and just have agenda for a meeting. And then when I have the next meeting, I put the agenda right on top of that one in the Google Doc. And then you just end up with a long Google Doc, but everything is in there. And we just take notes right in there. We have links to other documents in there. Just whatever your system is, have some kind of note-taking system. It's especially important online so that people can be looking at the same document and even contributing to it in real time. And I'm sure you have other tips. So just be thinking to yourself, okay, what have I learned about meetings in an online environment that I want to remember for online, but also might just be wise for being in person. So those are a few tips for that. And then if you are meeting in an online environment, just a few tips that are technology specific. One, just make sure the norms are clear. Like, people are getting pretty good at mute buttons now, but just get your mute button on. Video if you can do it, but if it's not possible for bandwidth or what's going on in the background of your space, like that's okay, but just be clear. Be clear if it's being recorded, how that'll be used, how are we using the chat box, all those things. Just make that clear at the beginning. I think one of the things with technology is just to remember things take a smidge longer than we're used to. One of my colleagues calls it a technology task. So, excuse me, a technology tax. So, one of my tips is just build that in. So, your agenda shouldn't be so packed that it doesn't have room for it just taking a little bit longer for everybody to get online or if we're using breakout spaces to get in and out of the breakout spaces. So, just remember the technology tax. I think even if you're in person, it's a good idea to remember just like 5 minutes of wiggle gives you a little room for transitions and things, but especially important online. My third tip for meeting in an online environment around technology specific things is sometimes just not to use the computer. So lately, I've been using the phone when I have one-on-one meetings whenever possible. It used to be, of course, that meeting face to face was the thing we always preferred, and then a phone felt a little less personal. But in an online environment, I think people's eyes and bodies can get very tired of being sitting and looking at a screen. And so it's a refreshing change. And you can even encourage people go for a walk outside with your phone and that's a different way we can interact, and that's actually been working pretty well in a lot of my meetings. And then the fourth tip is just use the assets of technology. What's cool actually about being in an online environment is there's some things we can do either better or more easily anyway online than we can do in person. So breakout rooms are a good example of that. It's actually much easier to get in and out of small groups and to mix people up online than it is in person. The chat box is nice. You can have a kind of back channel of people reacting and getting their voices in much easier than face to face. All of those kinds of things. Just be really clear, who's playing that moderator, like how are people knowing when it's their turn to talk? Are we raising actual hands and waving? Are we raising like Zoom hands? That kind of thing. But um, you technology can do some things we can't do face to face, and you might as well take advantage of that. So again, I'm sure you have some technology specific tips that you figured out, and I encourage you just to make a note of those for yourself. We're all trying to learn very quickly about how to be together effectively in different media.